So this is Sifu David A. Ross, and welcome once again to the Lions Roar podcast. As people know, usually what happens with these podcasts is I'm motivated by something that's going on that I'm seeing either online or going on in my classes or whatever. It's not really that important to go into what motivated my discussion tonight, because I kind of don't want to go off on a tangent, which is discussing what motivated me is its own sort of discussion in and of itself. But what happened was, in discussing this other thing, I talked about how difficult it is to get people to quote-unquote fight with the traditional, or to keep that fighting spirit alive in traditional. And I said that I was trying to explain my views on why I think that is. Certainly because I came from a traditional background, and yet, I ended up training all these fighters and, doing all these other things. But I want to do it step by step. So I've talked about this before, but I'll reiterate it because also some people, haven't been around decades listening to my stories. But I started off as a very traditional Chinese martial arts person. I wrote more than 50 articles about Chan Tai-san and his methods, and I ran his school and traveled with him and trained people in a very traditional manner, as I understand tradition. But I went to Washington, D.C. To go to graduate school. I went to the George Washington University. I went to the Elliott School of International Affairs. And while I was down there, my initial plan was to train in one of the Kung Fu schools down there. And I went down there, and unfortunately they were just doing forms. And, well, honestly, I had so many forms already. I had forms from before I met Chan Tai-san. I had forms from Chan Tai-san. It just wasn't appealing, or it just wasn't necessary. And I saw a flyer for a Jeet Kune Do group that was actually at George Washington. And they were a Jeet Kune Do group that had some affiliation with Joe Louis, the fighter, and also had some affiliation with Arjun Chai, so they did a lot of Thai boxing. And I started working out with them, and basically, they were doing kickboxing, Thai boxing, gloves on, and a lot of, partner drills and everything. And I had a lot of fun with them. Unfortunately, they said, we're going to move, so we're going to be in this other place next week. And I said, oh, great, I'll see you in this other place. And then something came up with school, and I didn't go there. And then I went there the week after, and they weren't there. And I had not bothered to get the number, and I lost track of them, which is really unfortunate. And, but the time I spent with them was very important because, again, I went there. I had a lot of sparring experience. I was working out with them, and I was having a lot of fun and being very productive. But I really started pondering, what about the students that we were training back in New York in a traditional way? Would they be able to come into this environment and deal with, hooks and uppercuts and knees and elbows and, stuff? I had done this. I had sparred people that had done Kyokushin and had done full contact karate and had done Thai boxing. I had a lot of sparring experience and a lot of fighting experience. But what about the students? And so one of my first thoughts when I first came back to New York was to create sort of a quick, direct mini course to teach people how to get some fighting skills. And if you remember years and years and years ago, if you've followed me that long, I used to go by, on a lot of internet forums, by LKF MDC, which was Lama Kung Fu Modern Defense Concepts. And nobody knew what that was. Nobody knew what the acronym was. Nobody, if I told them, knew what it was. But it was that plan to make sort of like a cheat sheet, or like an introductory course. It's kind of similar, actually, to what the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu did in the beginning, when Elio was teaching with his brothers and stuff. They had sort of this mini program that you did in private lessons with them, and then once you got through that mini program, then they put you in the regular classes and stuff. And it was sort of that idea that never really took off, but that was sort of my initial idea. And ironically, people, I guess, sort of think, the UFC started me getting interested in fighting, but I was doing that before the UFC really started, because I was in graduate school down there in '91, so that was before the UFC. But then I saw the UFC, and so then sort of related to this was I wanted to definitely train people to show that Kung Fu people could fight, and to show people how, traditional had taught people, even though I guess maybe it hadn't taught them, but, the way I had learned traditional, I didn't find anything really controversial about the early UFCs. I just thought that people weren't training very well for it because they were sort of limited by their worldviews. A guy came in and he had done sport, full contact karate, aka American kickboxing, or a guy was a judo guy. Only the people that were really training for sort of an integrated all around kind of martial arts approach were actually the Gracie family themselves, Hoist and everything. So I wanted to train people for MMA, and people don't understand this because, I first got, I guess, well known for training people in Sancho, the original Sancho format, IWF rules. But actually in like 95, 96, I was training people for MMA, and I was trying to promote my own version of MMA, which is kind of like amateur Shudo B or C class kind of stuff. And we did some events in New York. But I got sort of unhappy with that result because back then in like the 90s, when the UFC first started, everyone became obsessed with fighting on the ground. So like everyone wanted to clinch and go to the ground. Even my guys, I was like, we're stand-up fighters. I mean, of course we have to know some ground, but why are you clinching and taking somebody down to fight on the ground? We're stand-up fighters. So that's when I started taking people to do Sancho because, first of all, back then there wasn't a lot of Muay Thai to be done. It was at the height of, not the height of, but certainly in New York, most of the shows were still doing American kickboxing, and that was just too far removed from what I wanted to do. So, like I said, I was training people for MMA, then I wanted to do Sancho to work their stand-up more, and since it had the grappling, and then of course I ripped all my hair out, joke intended, obviously, dealing with the people running Sancho in the U.S. and we did well, but I started promoting my own thing, Sanda. I ruffled a lot of feathers. I did the first thing where it was like wasn't a tournament, it was a card, and I was the first one to say, let's not use a lei tai, let's use a boxing ring, and then I suggested we do knees and stuff, and had a lot of problems because I was just outspoken. A lot of people didn't like what was going on in the USA WKF, but I was the one that not only said it out loud but said it directly to the people involved and fought against them and stuff, and I was willing to do that. But that's how I first started training fighters. And then, of course, once I started training fighters, I became interested in what were the most effective methods. So, I want to teach people how to punch hard. So let's go look at boxing. I want to teach people how to grapple. So let's look at judo. Let's look at wrestling. Let's look at, sambo. Let's look at all these different things. Got interested, obviously, when MMA, as MMA evolved in what's Greco-Roman, what's, catch wrestling, that's done everything. And back then, when you were training fighters, and I was training so many fighters, obviously, I was very focused on teaching them the methods that would be immediately applicable to their matches, and so I kind of drifted away from traditional, so to speak. But I trained a tremendous amount of people, and I went from my Sancho phase to my Sanda phase, and then went back to MMA. I trained a lot of successful MMA guys. Still continue to have people doing Muay Thai, especially as Muay Thai got more popular. I've had people that trained with me that then went to Thailand and fought under full rules in Thailand. I've done a lot of different stuff. But as people sort of know also, I sort of drifted back to doing traditional because, I tell people a lot of times, I got tired of running a gym for fighters. I got tired of being a coach for fighters. Again, considering the real reason I trained fighters in the first place was to prove that traditional can work and to understand how it works myself and to know more about it and to prove things. And I feel like, I've been there, done that, and I have the T-shirt. I know what works and what doesn't work. I know it because, at the beginning we were doing everything. We were doing, the American kickboxing. I had guys that did American kickboxing, were very successful doing it. I had guys doing amateur, Western boxing, the Golden Gloves. I had people doing submission grappling tournaments. I had people, doing everything that could be done. And then, like I said, in the things that are the most competitive, amateur MMA, pro MMA, and Muay Thai, I had people doing it. I had 18 champions in tournament style Sancho. I had 3 world champions in the Sanda that started developing, that became popular, which I would argue I sort of started. But I got tired. I don't have to prove it anymore, and I want to kind of offer like a holistic education in martial arts. So I started going back to teaching traditional. But I can tell you, it is harder to teach traditional than it is to teach, fighting formats more like boxing, kickboxing, Thai boxing. Generally, I refer to this as the kickboxing framework. I said, you can still do traditional in a kickboxing framework, but, you have a fighting stance, you learn basic blocks. I said that my initial goal was to look for the things that were not attribute-based, that the most amount of people would be the most successful with, the highest percentage for the highest number of people kind of techniques. And traditional is not always like that. And, I've gone back and forth trying to teach forms. Excuse me, I got horrible allergies. I don't even know why. With, varied success. But going back to what I'm talking about, which is the fighting aspect, I took people that I had trained in my Sanda framework, my kickboxing framework, so to speak, which is, fighting stance, basic techniques, basic blocking, MMA kind of stuff, and then started showing them traditional. And they were able to pick it up, though, surprisingly and a little bit to me, I sort of started, re-remembering. One of the reasons also I had moved away from traditional, which was how hard it was to get people to grasp things that which, when I was training, I don't know, seemed to me like not so difficult, but people have a lot of trouble with. For example, I'm kind of doing something now, 24 hands, which is sort of like a list of basic Chinese martial arts application stuff related to what I do. And my argument would be, like, obviously it's coming from Lama, it's coming from Shui Jiao, it's coming from Bak Mei, it's coming from Xingyi, the things that, have influenced me the most. But I would argue that they're all sort of the same. They're not, well, that's specifically Lama, and that's specifically Shui Jiao, and that's specifically Bak Mei, and that's specifically Xingyi. No, and I sort of would argue, as I've always argued, that Chinese martial arts are sort of at their heart more same than they are different, and the rest is just, marketing and the marketplace kind of stuff. But I've been trying to do this stuff because I wanted to be like, this is the most basic Kung Fu application, traditional application that you should learn. And I'm even seeing people having trouble with that. Not so much my people that did like 15 years of my Sanda framework, but I'm starting to, bring in new people to do the quote-unquote Kung Fu classes, or people that have done only a little bit of Sanda with me and now are trying to learn traditional also. And I think what it really comes down to, right, and I've said this in various ways at different times, but like the very best things about Kung Fu are also the very worst things. It's a double-edged sword. What's the application of this? The famous answer, is it this, or this? Yes. The nature of Kung Fu is that it is so open-ended, so much. You can do this, you can do that, you can do this, you can do that. In one way, it's great because it gives you this vast encyclopedia of, material. But for somebody that's just beginning the study, it's overwhelming and it's hard to learn. For example, well, after this, what can I do? You can do this, you can do this, you can do this. No, you have to sometimes, the expedient means the simple answer. Do this and follow up with this, and then it sort of becomes like a laundry list. It becomes like, your commercial karate school where you think that, outside block is always followed by, a punch and, a round kick or whatever, and it's not. But the problem is that even something basic like, mirror hand against a grab, which could be a punch. The Kung Fu way is, well, their foot could be here or their foot could be here. It could be their left foot or it could be their right foot. It could be their right hand and their left foot stepping at the same time, or their right foot and their left hand stepping at the same time. And by the way, your foot could be this way, or your other foot could be this way, or you could be standing this way, or you could be on the inside of the arm, or you could be on the outside of the arm. Now, this is true when it comes to real combat, right? All these things are possibilities. But the problem is when you're trying to teach somebody something, you don't want to say to them, here's the 300 possibilities that are going to happen in this situation that you now have to learn all of them. I've often said, the Tang Shou Dao, Kong Yi Shang, what I think was one of the miraculous things about it, one of the things that made it most successful, was the organization. Organization is everything. Even with the 24, I'm trying to organize, but I'm seeing like even in the organization, it's a little harder to get people to do the traditional ways because you don't have to say, well, you're going to try to catch it either on the inside of the hand or the outside of the hand. It's going to be either your left foot or your right foot, but you can go in either direction, and both are techniques. And then once you get that mirror hand, well, here are like 30 follow-ups. It's much harder to teach this, as opposed to, here, take this stance. You're always going to have your left foot forward. You're always going to have your hands up. He's going to come with the left because it's a jab, and you're going to parry it with your right hand. Much easier to teach. It's, in a way, self-limiting. But as opposed to all the different ways that we can do things in Chinese martial arts, this becomes the problem, is that you have to, look at the fullness, but then you have to, trim it down to be digestible. And so I think that's the problem why people are having trouble being applicable with what they do. I think also, it's the wrong perception. We see a lot of fighting events where they try to make the rules to make people fight with their style. And I think that just even starting from that point is just fundamentally flawed. You don't fight with a style. I can study Xing Yi with the same teacher, and 6 other people can study the same Xing Yi with the same teacher, and in the end they'll all be different. Different sizes, different inclinations, different brain patterns, whatever you want to talk about. It's different. So I don't think you fight with a style either. I mean, I think that Kung Fu is more theoretical than it is. It's more that, I always say it's more Yi, it's more the intentionality than the Xing, the shape. And I don't mean that the way that Xing Yi people use those terms. I mean that more, I'm just looking for a Chinese term to attach that. But it's not looking like a particular form. It's not looking like a particular position. It's not looking like a particular technique in a particular form. These are concepts. And, again, they're concepts in the sense that, for example, you do the 5-element fist in Xing Yi. There's not one application. There's hundreds of applications for the same fist. This is sort of getting up with the problem I'm talking about. So expecting someone when they're fighting to look a certain way, behave a certain way, act a certain way, quote unquote, fight in the style is just fundamentally the wrong idea. It's a misunderstanding. I think if you have concepts, that's what's different. And I point out again myself, people look and say, well, that looks like boxing. Well, except that if somebody really knew Western boxing, they tell you that a lot of the things that we do are different than Western boxing. And the same with Thai boxing. Well, a lot of those things, obviously, some of the clinch and the knees and the elbows that we picked up from Thai boxing. But a lot of the stuff we do is very different than Thai boxing. Obviously, any of the grappling and stuff has nothing to do with Thai boxing. It's completely different. Again, people have weird ideas of what they think a style or tradition or a method is. And again, my fighters would have like a kind of kickboxing framework, kind of a boxing stance, and they're wearing gloves and they're fighting in a ring or fighting in a cage. And even the punches may look like a jab and a cross, but they also, look like llama punches, to do entries, to get throws, which are sui jiao, that to me is fighting with the style. It goes above and beyond. I just think that, I don't know where these ideas came from. I mean, then again, maybe I kind of do. I mean, it's again, it's poor translation and transmission of material. which I guess is why, if I could name 100 masters, which I can, I could probably on the fingers of one hand talk about the ones that are really proficient in using what they're doing for real fighting. Whereas a lot of other masters, they know about their system, they know the applications and stuff, and then as it trickles down, it gets less and less and less to people that really just don't know anything. And, on the mainland also, years of the wushu movement and, just doing forms and being rewarded for doing the forms kind of thing has added to it. But we have just as much problem outside of China and people that have never had anything to do with the contemporary wushu movement. We've just sort of lost that application stuff. And I think it's because, people had trouble learning this stuff, like I said, because it's so daunting. It's such a big, thing to go through and digest. And so it's much easier to go, well, just do the form. Then you're going to definitely look like you're doing the form because you're doing the form. As opposed to, well, you're going to fight where you'll maybe look like the form. And maybe looking like the form is not what you think looking like the form means. This is, the ideas I'm getting at here. And what's funny is, I said before, took my students to train with Greg Nelson, and he was doing some stuff that he identified as Thai boxing. But to us, it was like, oh, it's pure Lama. It looks exactly like the way that you use the 7-star stepping in Lama. And later on, I saw the Xingyi version of 7-star stepping is a very similar kind of thing. And the reality is that it's Xingyi's 7-star, it's Lama's 7-star, and it's also Thai boxing. So, again, these we're always looking for, the aha moment, or we're always looking to identify something as belonging exclusively to one tradition. We're always looking for that truth. And truth is much more elusive and evasive than that. And also, in some ways, it's much simpler than that. Like I said, it's all the same stuff. But people don't like that, because if you want to feel special, thinking that everybody's doing basically the same stuff is not going to make you feel special. So, I don't know how long I've been on here. Not a huge amount of time, obviously. But these are just some of my thoughts on why it's hard to keep fighting alive in traditional. Doesn't mean that it won't happen. I mean, I'm trying desperately to offer people, not necessarily my material, but my thoughts. Whatever you do, you can continue. But I think you need some kind of, like I said, kickboxing framework, Sanda framework, first before you go into traditional. If you just go right into the traditional, I think the last 4 or 5 decades, or maybe 200 years, even have proven that that's not the best way to go. Have a foundation first. Have some readily available skills before you start looking at the more advanced stuff. Or as I've said before, pick your meat before you start looking for your gravy. Pick your main course, even if it's not meat. This is David Ross. This is The Lion's Roar, and as always, thank you for tuning in.